On today's show, South Africa's Public Service Association, which represents 240,000 workers, has gone on strike over a wage dispute with the country's government. We explore the reasons behind the wage disputes and assess the impact these strikes will have on the country's economy. Staying in South Africa, the country's lawmakers are on the verge of passing a new law which they hope will reduce the corruption and graft that became endemic during Jacob Zuma's time as leader. But will it work? And then Nigeria has a steel mill in Ajaokuta that hasn't produced any steel in a very long time, but the country's government has spent 29.35 billion naira on paying its staff since 2016. We get to also find out what is going on there. Now, these will be our focus this morning. This is Business Edge. I am Lekon Onobanjo, standing in for Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. You're welcome. And we will take you through the African headlines in a bit. Stay with us. We'll get into it in a while. Looking at the African business headlines now, Kenya's government is reducing its rate of borrowing to attain a significantly narrow budget deficit in the next financial year. President William Ruto's administration, which took over in mid-September, is in the process of revising its budget for this fiscal year to reduce expenditure by 300 billion shillings. That's about $2.47 billion, aiming for a recurrent surplus in 3 years. Now, public debt surged under the administration of Ruto's predecessor, Uhuru Kenyatta, which presided over an infrastructure construction drive. The new government is planning to set a budget deficit of 4.3% of gross domestic product in the next financial year, the finance ministry said. A South African court has overturned an earlier order halting construction of Amazon's new African headquarters in Cape Town after some descendants of the country's earliest inhabitants said the land it would be built on was sacred. In March, the court agreed to halt the project, saying that in the absence of proper consultation, the fundamental right to culture and heritage of indigenous groups, particularly the Khoi and San First Nation peoples, were under threat. Now, the latest judgment allowing construction to continue by a full bench of the Western Cape's High Court was welcomed by developers of the precinct as a major win for jobs in the popular tourist city, where class and racial divisions endure 3 decades after apartheid ended. Zimbabwe's miners face rising costs and persistent electricity shortages, which will impact the sector's growth prospects next year. An industry body said on Wednesday the Southern African country has pinned hopes on the mining sector to drive its economic recovery after years of decline blamed on the government's forced seizure of white-owned farms in the year 2000 and excessive spending, which fueled hyperinflation. An industry report published by Zimbabwe's Chamber of Mines, which represents the country's major mining firms, says the sector will experience a slower 7% growth next year from a projected 8% this year. Mauritania has signed a memorandum of understanding to explore ways to develop low-carbon hydrogen on a large scale in the West African country. The memorandum of understanding, which does not include a time frame or targets for the project, aims to build on BP's presence in a country where it is already developing a large liquefied natural gas facility. Under the plan, BP will initially study the feasibility of building onshore wind and solar farms that are required for production of green hydrogen, which is produced by electrolysis using renewable energy. And finally, Nigeria is targeting 6.3% rate, 7.7% economic growth and 0.3% poverty rate by the year 2050. This was disclosed by the Minister of Budget and National Planning, Clem Agba, during a pre-National Economic Summit press conference held in Abuja on Wednesday. Agba said the Nigeria Agenda 2050, which was developed by the current administration, was designed to transform the country into an upper middle income developing country with a per capita income of about $33,000. On the other hand, he said the National Development Plan 2021 to 2025 had a vision to unlock the potential of the country in all sectors of the economy for a sustainable, holistic and inclusive national development. So those are the those are the African stories that we have for you on the business terrain. We go on a break now, and when we return, we'll be looking at South Africa. That country is actually working on an anti-graft law. So we get to look at the details of that law and see what it means for the Procurement Act. So while we sort out logistics to discuss the anti-graft law in South Africa, we will still stay in South Africa, but then we get to quickly consider the issue that has to do with public workers going on strike. Why is that? Now, public workers in South Africa are on strike and they are demanding for an increase above inflation, but the government is insisting on a 3% rise. Currently, inflation in South Africa is 7.5%. One of the unions, the Public Sector Association, is asking for 6.5%, while the Federation of Unions of South Africa is asking for 10% rise in salaries. PSA has issued a strike notice since October 24, and several meetings had been held between the workers and government, but they have all hit a stalemate. So joining me from Johannesburg, South Africa, is Philisa Nkom. She's an economist, and we get to consider the issue with the strike about to kickstart in South Africa. Thanks for joining us, Philisa.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. And good afternoon to the listeners, to the viewers as well.
All right, so let's start by looking at the issue of the strike that is about to start. Would it be wrong to say that the government is not taking public workers seriously as they should?
I mean, yes, because the reality is that the condition of work for a lot of public sector workers really is not in a good standards. And we've not seen this type of potential strike in a long time. And part of it has to do with the fact that workers have always understood that government is actually not only struggling, but in fact, government had introduced several restructuring plans. So in essence, I know that I said to you in my response, yes, government doesn't seem to be taking workers seriously. But at the same time, government is also confronted with the serious constraint of, fiscal challenges. And so in essence, what is really happening is that there's a lot of chessboard work that needs to take place between government officials, but as well as the public sector workers. Yesterday, we attended, I joined, in fact, a portfolio committee on public service where the Public Service Commissioner was actually presenting a report about the quality of public service that is granted to citizens, and at the same time, the need for us to really improve, the quality, and that one of the obvious key issues that has really come up through is that public sector workers struggle to take their work seriously. There's a lack of commitment, and they actually don't understand the relationship between workers and citizens. Now, that narrative is actually so common in the public discourse that citizens feel that they've not been given, sufficient or good quality service by public sector workers. So in essence, there is a bit of a standoff between citizens, public sector workers, as well as government. And part of it has to do with the fact that really we've not had a social compact. I know that I've moved a little bit outside of the public sector worker strike, but I'm making a link between the need to sign social compact between citizens, workers, and as well as government, because the reality is that without an agreed, service quality agreement, right, between citizens and government and workers, there's always going to be this type of tension. To an extent that I've not seen, in fact, I've been paying a lot of attention to media coverage. I've not seen a sense of solidarity being extended to public, we support their strike, etc. People are kind of like quite mum. And I think public sectors have really been upfront in terms of saying, where do they, what are their challenges, right? And working conditions, and the fact that there are certain occupations that have not been graded, sufficiently.
All right. Yeah.
In fact, I can.
Pelisa, let me just quickly come in there. Sorry to cut you, but then looking at the issue of solidarity and agreements, now PSA is asking for 6.5%, while COSATU is asking for 10% increase in wages. Now, why is there a disparity in these demands from the two unions?
That's a very interesting point. I think, firstly, it speaks a lot about the unison that is supposed to be demonstrated by the trade unions, right? So it signals that actually they're not entirely united in as far as what government should be paying. But also the other issue as well, remember also COSATU is also tripartite, is a member of a tripartite alliance with the ANC, and it's possible that there's something that they know which other trade unions actually don't know, meaning that they might know that government can afford, that's why they're looking for 10%. But in any case, it's a common phenomenon, by the way, in the bargaining process and the wage demand, where workers would always demand higher wage increases with the hope that government is likely to settle for less, but also in that context, they won't lose money. And I think that COSATU's strategy in particular is to make it sure that they actually don't lose money in the negotiation period. That even if government end up settling for less, and that, by the way, they'll still be able to recover, or they'll be able to still have, sufficient funding in their pockets.
All right, Pelisa, picking from what you said there are concerns that the government might not be able to pay or meet up with those kind of payments. And some people are also skeptical that even if they're able to pay and they agree to pay, will they be able to sustain the trend? Of course, because you know that wage rise will continue to happen every now and then. So are there any contingency plans by governments to meet the demands of these workers? So what do you think would happen in between this hullabaloo?
Well, it's still unclear, by the way. And I mean, it's true that to demand 10% and 6%, etc., in the context of high inflation and as well as low growth, amongst the key things is that government is going to scrimp. But obviously, I think governments, workers are going to put more pressure. Already tomorrow, they're already threatening national strike, which is going to be total shutdown. So obviously, the implications is that they won't, the intention is to really put pressure, but the implication is that there won't be services. Because it's police, it's nurses, for example, it's other, public sector workers which fall within the municipal or local government sector, which do refuse collection, which do cleaning of public parks, which provide services in sewer systems, and who does plumbing, services within the municipality. So the reality is that government is going to soon be caught in a crossroad. I don't think there's anyone who's currently clear about what government is going to be doing. Obviously, the message they're sending now is that they are not budging to workers' demands, and that, in fact, they're starting to put up contingency plans to make it sure that there's a clear backup plan. Now, obviously, you know that nurses are actually essential workers, police are actually essential workers. So what it means is that even if both groups actually embarks on a public sector strike, the implication would be that they might need to make it sure that there's always a skeleton staff that is left behind. So the reality is that I think everyone else is in a crossroad, and that's why the workers actually want to intensify the strike to put more pressure, and that government should actually come onto the table.
All right, talking about putting more pressure, Pelisa. Now, we understand that South African workers have not had their salaries increased in the last 3 years. So why is it that the unions are pushing now? And do they also have the mettle, the strength to be able to follow through and push through in getting their demands?
Well, I mean, yes, they do have the strength because they have numbers. That's the first thing. Public sector employs 1.2 workers, right? So they do have the strength, right? And then I think the second issue, part of it is that part of the reason why they are likely to have delayed, their demands until now is that actually they've been quite lenient. And in their leniency, they were hoping that government is going to actually make it sure that it looks after their interests, but also it's more honorable in making sure that if they've not had, increase for 3 years, and that at least they would be. Unfortunately, of course, they are making their demands at the time where I'm speaking about low growth, for instance, and high inflation, which in fact, by the way, does affect workers, as well, because workers equally are actually affected by high inflation. They're affected by macroeconomic austerity measures. In fact, in the recent budget, the Minister of Finance actually did not intimate any other increases. And that's why they just given that 3% as a sweetener with the hope that the workers are actually going to go away.
All right, finally, before I let you go, Pelisa, now the government is hard-headed. The unions are also not backing down. In about a minute or two, where do you think this is heading?
No, it's going to head into a showdown where I think workers are going to show their strength in terms of numbers and stay away from work, even though they will leave. In fact, they're obligated by law to leave a skeleton staff. So it's going to be a showdown moment. And I do hope that government will not have to wait for that showdown moment, that in essence, they'll be able to actually find a solution. I mean, I do think that the strike often, in fact, any industrial strike always presents an opportunity.
All right, thank you so much, Pelisa, for joining the discussion this morning. We hope to engage you some other time. Now, public service worker salaries have increased by an annual average of 2 percentage points above inflation for the past decade in South Africa, and compensation accounts for almost a third of government expenditure. So the question is, can the government meet up with these bills? Do you think the South African government has what it takes to pay the South African workers, because there are other debts, there are other expenditures on their sides that need to be paid? Will they be able to live up to that billing? We'll continue to look at the conversation, but then at this time, we'll go on a break to bring you our next segment on the show. Do stay with us. We'll be right back.